Welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. You know, here at the Takeout, we love many things. We love nothing more than we love facts. Facts provide clarity. They help us understand and harness ourselves to things that are reliable, verifiable, things that are true. There is a topic raging in this country, has been raging for decades: immigration. Immigration has a lot of assumptions. It has a lot of fears. It has a lot of things that people believe that might not be true. So we're going to dig down into the facts about immigration, facts that will surprise people on the right, facts that will surprise people on the left. Our guest to help us do that, Zeke Hernandez. He is the author of a new book, The Truth About Immigration. You see where I'm going there. The subtitle, Why Successful Societies Welcome Newcomers. Zeke, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Introduce yourself to my audience. Who is Zeke Hernandez?
I'm a professor of business at the Wharton School. I've been there for about 11 years. I study immigration, of course, and how it affects the economy, and generally how the movement of people, ideas, and businesses create economic prosperity.
And what is your story as it relates to America and immigration?
Well, I am an immigrant myself. I was born in the little country of Uruguay. For those who might not know, that's wedged between Brazil and Argentina, a tiny little country, about 3.5 million people. I was born there. When I was a young child, my father got transferred to Central America for his work, and so I've been a foreigner in a few different countries, always in Spanish-speaking Latin America. And I moved here to the United States over 22 years ago to come to college.
And you came on a student visa?
I came on a student visa with the idea that I would be here for about 4 years, get a bachelor's degree, and go right back home. My motivation for coming to the U.S. was that in those years growing up, I had seen a lot of poverty, and I was deeply moved by the poverty I'd seen. And so I thought that I wanted to go back and make a difference in growing the economy, just trying to help people. Of course, that's not exactly the way it turned out. One opportunity led to another here in the U.S., and I had the opportunity to go to graduate school, and really with the motivation of studying what is it that creates economic prosperity. I never intended...
Not immigration per se.
Not at all. I always say that I'm an accidental immigration scholar. I didn't mean to study immigration. And I think that's important to say because given the conversation we're about to have, somebody could really sort of stereotype this and say, okay, here's someone who's an immigrant who had preconceived notions about immigration and wrote this book to sort of, I don't know, self-justify his life or something. The reality is I had no intention of studying immigration. It wasn't intellectually something I was curious about, but as I was in graduate school trying to understand what is it that creates investment, jobs, innovation, the things that really grow an economy, I realized that you can't separate that from the movement of people because ultimately it's people and their movement that create all those things. And so it was just a variable I couldn't ignore, a fact I couldn't get away from, and that led me down now nearly 20 years of really digging into the research and surprising, first of all, myself. Because when I came with the notion that immigration might be good for immigrants, but maybe not so good for natives, that it might be a zero-sum game.
Right.
In some ways, I had many...
If somebody gains, somebody loses.
Well, yeah, capitalism has winners and losers, right? So someone's winning, someone's losing. And so this is a journey of 20 years, in some ways of surprising myself first, realizing, oh my goodness, it turns out that there's mostly win-wins, economically speaking, and also culturally and socially. And after presenting this to many audiences for many years, trying to go out and share what I had learned through research, I realized there's a big disconnect between what the average person knows and what the evidence really shows. And the result is this book that we're going to talk about.
If you could summarize 3 or 4 of the leading misconceptions about immigration as it is thought about and talked about in America, what would they be?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. I would say if I started at a very high level,
right.
we have been told, and we believe, meaning the average person believes one of two narratives about immigrants. The first is what I call the villain narrative, the idea that immigrants do us damage because they either steal our jobs economically, they undermine our culture, they create security and safety problems because of their criminality. That's a message that certain political movements and parties use very effectively to their advantage, very effectively to garner votes.
Not just now, but in our past.
Exactly. So it's not, I'm not describing something that's happening now. 100 years ago, when it was Southern and Eastern Europeans that were coming to this country, people really thought that Italians, Germans, Jews could not possibly become part of the fabric of America. They've done just fine since then. Now it's Asians and Latin Americans. So it's a perennial debate. But yeah, the villain narrative, that's one of them. The other narrative, and it's interesting because this is often presented as a counter narrative, is what I call the victim narrative or the victim story. And this is embodied in the Statue of Liberty. Emma Lazarus holding up the torch, bring me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. And it's a message that's very compassionate, but it paints immigrants as needy outsiders who need us, but it costs us very much to welcome them, right? And the problem with those two narratives is not just that the facts prove them both wrong, but one doesn't undermine the other, because it could be true that immigrants are needy outsiders who cost us a lot, right? It could be true that they're villains. And then it comes down to whether you think we should favor outsiders or insiders. And you know who's going to win that political rhetorical battle. Right? It's going to be the villain narrative that tends to win out. So that's the first major misconception. And what the facts show is that immigrants are neither villains nor victims. They are net positive contributors to everything that makes for a prosperous economy, everything that makes for a prosperous society. That would be number one. Yeah.
And the left tends to embrace the victim narrative, and the right tends to embrace the villain, if they politically embrace one or the other.
I think right now that's the case. And interestingly, it's a historical anomaly that's lining up well along party lines, but it hasn't always been that way. For example, many religious people who tend to be more right of center in their politics really buy into this victim narrative, right? Because out of, say, Christian compassion, we want to help the outsider, welcome the poor and the needy. That's a New Testament tenet, right? And so, yeah, it's not just left or right, but it seems to be that way lately. Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to launch into this because we only have a minute before we go to break. I want to acknowledge Chef Jeff is our host restaurant. Thank them for their hospitality. Lunch will soon arrive. We're recording this on June 6th. Is there something about, Zeke, our history of immigration that you regard as kind of a through line, as something that is a constant even though the politics fluctuate?
I think there's two constants. One is America benefits fantastically from immigration. And we'll talk about this more, I'm sure, after the break, but in terms of investment, innovation, job creation. But most people seem not to believe that. And so the other threat is just fear, constant fear of the next wave. And that dichotomy is just very strange.
Right, because we have quantifiable benefits over many, 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 many decades.
That's right.
We have a strong desire to come here. People will go through just about anything to get here. And yet this fear factor always seems to be part of our immigration shadow, the shadow that we cast as a country.
That's right.
This notion of anxiety about what's actually going to happen or what is happening. We're going to pick up on that thread when we come back. Segment 2 of the Takeout coming your way from Chef Jeff's in just 1 second.
They even had a hierarchy of breeds, of human breeds, with Nordics being the best and then Mediterraneans being kind of the lowest.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Zeke Hernandez is our special guest. His book, The Truth About Immigration. Briefly, Zeke, what is our origin story with immigration, like the first 50, 75 years of America?
Yeah, I mean, in the first several decades, exactly that period you mentioned, America had what some would call today open borders, right? That is, there were no restrictions. In fact, the census didn't even keep track of the origins of people. That's why we don't have very reliable census records in terms of country of birth until about 1850. So anybody could come. The newcomers were primarily from Western Europe, so England, obviously Northern Europe, Ireland eventually. That was the first crop.
Right.
I
but
think,
just to
yeah.
settle on that for a second, folks, conceptually, practically, America started as an open borders country.
Well, look, I'll tell you even more. If you read the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, one of the things that the King of England was accused of, and one of the reasons for separating from England, was that he was not allowing enough immigration into America. So literally one of the reasons to declare independence was not enough immigration. I think most people also don't know that.
Exactly. Take us up to 1924.
Well, to get to 1924, which is the moment when America restricted immigration severely, we have to understand what happened in 1890.
Yes,
okay?
Please.
And so up until 1890, most immigrants are from Northern and Western Europe. Then you start getting mass arrivals from Southern and Eastern Europe. Italians, Greeks, Russians, Jews, Catholics instead of Protestants. And the only way to say it is this completely freaked out the establishment.
The white Protestant establishment.
Yeah, people just thought that these immigrants were different, that they couldn't assimilate, their languages were too different. And between 1890 and 1920, there was a 30-year concerted campaign driven mostly by Northeastern elites who purported to show that these immigrants were inferior economically, mentally, emotionally. They couldn't handle democracy. This coincided with the heyday of eugenics, and
right.
So the arguments were racialized. Oh, thank you.
Of course.
Tristany is here with lunch. Thank you very much.
Of course. You guys enjoy, okay?
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And there were commissions formed. There were lots of investigatory efforts undertaken.
Absolutely.
Things published about this to essentially verify and establish this truth.
That's correct. So it had the patina of scientific proof, right? The Dillingham Commission in 1907 was the first one. The Dillingham Commission wasn't as motivated by eugenics, although they did claim to prove that these immigrants were inferior. But really what allowed the movement to have a lot of legitimacy was between the early 1910s and the 1920s, the eugenics movement really took off.
And for my audience, briefly explain what eugenics meant.
Eugenics was the pseudoscience of creating a pure people through genetic crossbreeding, right? In the same way that you come up with a superior strain of corn or a superior type of cow, right, that you breed for certain purposes, you could do that with humans, okay? And this was a widely accepted science in the early 1900s that became...
And a lot of fear about mixing races and breeds, in other words.
Yeah, and they even had a hierarchy of breeds, of human breeds, with Nordics being the best and Mediterraneans, Alpines kind of beneath them and Mediterraneans being kind of the lowest. And then there were kind of these Asiatics, which were like
right.
as good as animals. Anyway, so that was what led to the justification. 1924 is pivotal because, in partly driven by post-World War I fears, the Emergency Quotas Act in 1921 and then the National Quotas Act in 1924 are passed. And these laws establish quotas that ban all immigrants from Asia and virtually ban all immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe. And the way they do that is they set the quota to be 2% of whatever their representation in the U.S. population was all the way back in 1890. Mm-hmm. By 1890, because almost no Southern and Eastern Europeans had arrived. And so that made it so that immigration from Italy well, the countries I just mentioned dropped by more than 90%, right? 3 countries, for the next 4 decades, 3 countries, England, Ireland, and Germany accounted for more than 3/4 of all immigration into the U.S.
And in the intervening decades after 1924, what happened to, let's say, one particular part of America? Innovation as expressed through patents.
Yeah, so this is really important. I think rightly so, the National Origins Act gets condemned for its xenophobia and racism, and you know, rightly so. But where it doesn't get condemned enough is how much damage it did to America's own economic self-interest. What you're referring to is there's studies that have come out showing that in the places that suffered the greatest declines in immigration because of these quotas, U.S.-born scientists, these are native scientists, suffered a decline of over nearly 70% in patenting permanently, right? This is not foreign-born science. This is native scientists who missed out from the new ideas of collaborating with these foreign-born scientists, right? This is really bad for innovation. It's really bad for national security. Right, a lot of the listeners or viewers here have watched like Oppenheimer, right? Oppenheimer popularized this idea of, oh my gosh, Germany could have come up with the nuclear bomb. Well, that was also true for advances in chemistry and weapons and a lot of technologies that are important for national security. Companies as well patented a lot less because of the loss of foreign-born scientists.
Then take us to 1965. What changes and why?
Yeah, so just real quick, one more thing. It wasn't just technological losses. U.S.-born workers lost jobs, even though people thought they were protecting native workers. And places that suffered the most losses from immigrants due to the 1920s restrictions, even to this day, today, get fewer investment than they did 100 years ago. So these restrictions have cast a long negative economic shadow. 1965.
Right.
So as the Cold War is raging and as the civil rights movement is going, all of a sudden the U.S. can't legitimately claim to be a beacon of freedom and rights while having an openly racist immigration system. So in 1965, after some years of effort, the Johnson administration passes the Immigration Act of 1965, which undid the quotas by country, okay? They raised the ceiling on the number of immigrants allowed. By a reasonable amount, they about doubled it, but the biggest change was not having quotas by country. And so that led to our modern wave of mass migration, this time from Asia and Latin America,
right,
up until now. And the arc of the story is that immigrants were about 15% of the U.S. population in the early 1900s. That went down to less than 5% by 1970, and now we've gone up to about 15% again.
About 15% again.
15% right now, yeah.
Are foreign-born.
Foreign-born.
And that is inclusive of those who are with and without documentation.
That's correct. That's correct. And what is unique about this wave is that we do have a very large population of undocumented immigrants. Nearly a quarter of all immigrants in this country are here without authorization, without green cards or visas, yeah.
And is that an historically large percentage?
Yeah.
Undocumented?
Yes, very large. You know, historically, sort of, it's at the largest ever. The thing is, you have to realize, until 1924, we didn't have any quotas, right?
Right.
And so you couldn't have undocumented or illegal immigration because there were no limits. I mean, there were some exceptions for some Asians, but broadly speaking, there were no limits.
Right.
So it's only when we started implementing systems of quotas that it was possible for people to be here without authorization, and we do have a large population that is. Mm-hmm.
When we come back, we'll talk about things that are very topical right now, like President Biden's recent executive order to quote-unquote close down the U.S.-Mexican border. Our guest, Zeke Hernandez, our restaurant Chef Jeff's lunch is here. Segment 3 of the Takeout in just 1 second.
I think where the popular narrative diverges from the facts is in why we have such a large problem at the border.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Zeke Hernandez is our special guest. His book, The Truth About Immigration. Zeke, as you well know, President Biden signed an executive order this very week. It is being criticized heavily in some quarters of the immigrant community.
Yeah.
Those who advocate politically on behalf of undocumented immigrants and immigrants generally. It is clearly a political response to a persistent political problem for the president, driven by a sense of anxiety about what's happened on the southern border and the arrival of many, many undocumented immigrants.
Yeah.
You write in the book about how the politics of immigration can lead to either policies or laws that can do unexpected harm.
Yeah.
Would you classify this executive action in that broad category?
I would say so. I understand the political reasons for the president to do this, and I think that it's understandable that there is indeed chaos at the border. And the problem of undocumented immigration is a problem that needs to be solved. I think where the popular narrative diverges from the facts is in why we have such a large problem at the border and such a large undocumented population. I like to say that before we can figure out the best way for people to come into this country, it's good to be informed about what they actually do once they're here. Right? Because it makes a big difference it makes a big difference if these newcomers are bringing benefits or not, right? If they're bringing benefits, then we should enact policies to encourage their coming, of course, in an orderly manner. If they're harming us, like the villain narrative says, then we should have policies that limit their entry. The problem is these border debates we have are totally divorced from any sense of what immigrants actually do. And so what happens is we have had 6 decades where the mindset has been, let's enforce the border ever more and pour more resources into enforcement, okay?
Into border control.
Into border control.
Right.
An analogy I use in the book is the analogy of speed limits, okay? Imagine that you have a superhighway, okay, and an interstate highway. Well, if that highway is the main thoroughfare through which we get innovation, investment, all the benefits of immigration that research documents, and now all of a sudden you put a speed limit of 20 miles an hour on that highway, what's going to happen, right? Well, people who have to get to work, right? People who are running for their lives, they're going to speed. They're going to cross the border without authorization,
right?
Because there's a very powerful incentive, because American businesses really want them and really need them. And so what I'm trying to get at is that the main reason we have a lot of undocumented immigration is because the immigration speed limit is too low. That is, the number of people we need for economic, humanitarian, and family reasons is much higher than the number of people the system allows. Just give you one example. 700,000 working age people die in the US each year. This is working age. This is not retirees. Our legal system doesn't allow us to replace them, not even that number, let alone the number of new people we need as businesses grow, as our demographic profile becomes older and more people retire. So when you get that big of a mismatch, you have these surges at the border that happen. And so if you keep enforcing a 25 mile per hour speed limit on a highway, sure, you can keep adding more cops, you can keep giving more speeding tickets, but you're not solving the problem that the speed limit is too low. And so the problem with these executive orders is that they're not changing the speed limit, and that's why we need this, often referred to comprehensive immigration reform to bring up the speed limit.
What does the data tell us about undocumented immigrants and the costs they impose or the benefits they create for our society?
Yeah, undocumented immigrants bring all the same economic benefits that any immigrant does. And that's, I know, surprising to many. But, let's just go through. So I'll throw up kind of a quick list of facts out there, right? Where immigrants settle, investment follows, right? So you want investment in your community, Well, immigrants bring more investment in two ways. One is they're 80% more likely to start businesses than natives. So those businesses, right? That's
80%.
80%, nearly double. And those businesses create jobs, not just for immigrants, but for many natives. Also, when a critical mass of people from a certain country settles in a certain place, companies from that country of origin invest there as well. A story that I love to tell is the story of Pollo Campero, one of the fastest growing restaurants in this country, restaurant from Guatemala. They're the most popular fast food chain in Central America, and they're beloved. They invested in the U.S. 20 years ago because there was a large Central American population in different parts of the U.S., and they have kind of settled and established restaurants in those communities. But they're responsible for creating over 5,000 jobs, and that's a low estimate, and those jobs are not just for immigrants, right? Why? Because the investment, so the immigrant community came first, investment from Central America followed, and jobs were created as a result, okay? Well, that happens whether an immigrant is here legally or not, right? Many of the Central American population is here without authorization, but the investment still follows, right? Investments bring a lot of innovation. They represent, sorry, did I say investments? Immigrants.
Right.
Immigrants are 16% of all inventors in the US. They account for 36% of all patents. 36%, so more than double their representation. Some of that is because they directly are the inventors on record, but about a third of that is because they make native inventors more productive.
Native inventors learn something or see something because of a collaboration with an immigrant.
Yeah, a simple story that illustrates that well. There was an Indian doctor in Mississippi who had done some of his training in India, but some of his training in Canada, then ended up working here in the United States, Dr. Hari P. Kohli. Dr. Kohli started talking with a colleague who thought he had to amputate the leg of a patient because the leg had a wound that wouldn't heal. Okay? And Dr. Kohli remembered that in India, he'd taken some lessons on Ayurvedic medicine where they talked about the healing properties of turmeric. So he talks about this with his colleague, another doctor, and they say, well, let's try turmeric. I mean, all hope is lost anyway. We might as well try something new. The patient's leg heals, and they ended up doing a clinical trial and filing the very first patent in the US on the healing properties of turmeric. Now, what's interesting is, after that, native-born, US-born scientists patent all the follow-on applications of turmeric for medical practice in the United States. So by collaborating with an Indian doctor, new knowledge that then gets expanded.
So when you go to your supermarket or your pharmacy and you see turmeric on the shelf in the wellness section, the reason you see it there is because of this collaboration so very long ago.
That's right. It's not that some random person found it on Google. It doesn't happen that way. The movement of ideas happens because people move, right? And it's not just what I call highbrow. This is highbrow stuff, right? Patents, medical technologies. What's making our interview possible, the transistors and microchips that allow us to transmit, many of those innovations introduced because of immigrant talent. That's all highbrow stuff. But you mentioned your supermarket and the supermarket aisle. Let's go to another aisle. Let's go to the food aisle in that supermarket and think of all the things that you buy routinely, right? Your favorite foods or the foods for special occasions. If you start removing from the aisles those that were introduced by immigrants, what's left in your supermarket cart?
Little drab.
Little drab, right? Everything from pasta to hamburgers to sushi to salsa, sriracha sauce that we all love. It's all gone. It's all gone. And this is not like immigrants with PhDs.
Right.
This is just groups of immigrants from different places that create product innovations that benefit all of us.
The voice of Zeke Hernandez. Segment 4, The Takeout from Chef Jeff's, coming your way in just one moment.
In any group, there's going to be some criminals. But actually, when you look at the data, the big surprise is that the group with the lowest rate of criminality in the U.S. is undocumented immigrants.
Welcome back to Takeout. Welcome back to Chef Jeff's and our guest, Zeke Hernandez. Zeke, talk to me about crime and immigrants. documented or undocumented.
Okay.
Because that is the leading fear factor around this debate.
Yeah. I think that it's one of the holy trinity of main concerns, right? Crime is one of them. Look, this is political season. You're 100% likely to see an ad on TV that shows the story of an undocumented immigrant, an illegal immigrant who came here and raped someone or murdered someone. You're 100% likely to see that. And then that gets generalized into these immigrants are destroying our communities and undermining our safety. Now, that anecdote, sure, it happened, right? Like people, in any group, there's going to be some criminals. But actually, when you look at the data, the big surprise is that the group with the lowest rate of criminality in the U.S. is undocumented immigrants, right? A native is twice as likely than an immigrant, more than twice as likely to commit a violent crime, 4 times as likely to commit a property crime, and nearly 3 times as likely to commit a drug crime. Okay, so undocumented immigrants actually commit the fewest crimes. This is also true for legal immigrants.
And nobody disputes this data.
No, look, of all the hot button topics, right? For some of them, the evidence can be a little mixed, or you have to interpret it carefully. This one is unambiguous. When you read all the competent studies, it's like Groundhog Day, right? Mm-hmm. It's just the same conclusion. And
no statisticians or social scientists or economists who look at this disagree about this particular fact.
No, look, the debate isn't how much crime immigrants commit; it's how little they commit. It's how far below, how much less than natives they do. That's really what the statistical debates are about. So it just does not happen. But I understand that because
it doesn't happen to the magnitude that our fear factor leads us to believe.
No, if anything, it's the other way around. You want your community to be safer, immigrants are likely to make it safer, right? In fact, with the sad backstory to that is that the children of immigrants, when they interact with natives, become more prone to crime. So if anything, it's immigrant children that need to be protected from natives. Yeah, so it's the opposite of what the popular notion is.
Public charges, and immigration.
Yeah. Okay, so that's another of the Holy Trinity, right? The second of the Holy Trinity. Look, in this one, I want to be compassionate in addressing this, in that I understand. In fact, my notion when I moved to the U.S. on a student visa, I hate to admit this, but I sort of looked down on immigrants that were perhaps not here legally or that were not on a student visa, not as sophisticated as me, and I thought, oh, they must be public charges, but I was like very proud of I'm not going to take from the system. But, this is where evidence is important, and it turns out that the headline is that the average immigrant in the United States contributes to taxes to the tune of $260,000 positive in net present value terms, okay? That's accounting for them and their descendants. So that's a wildly positive contribution to our public coffers. There is a nuance here, though, and this is something that we don't talk about enough, that there are short-term costs locally of welcoming newcomers. So even though this is expressed with a lot of cynicism, some of what the mayor of New York or Denver or the governors of Texas and Florida are saying that, hey, their states or localities are bearing a disproportionate share of the cost of welcoming newcomers in terms of...
And the mayors of Denver, Chicago, and New York have said exactly that.
Yeah, in terms of housing...
Democratic mayors, yeah.
Yeah, educating... The biggest one actually is educating the children of immigrants, because immigrants have more children than natives. That's the biggest cost. So that is true. So first-generation immigrants have a small, about $1,600 small negative cost at the state level when they arrive. But their children and grandchildren contribute more than double what the cost is, right? So in the long run, states get a return on that investment, right? If you think of welcoming new people as an investment, a fiscal investment, it just takes time, right? So the debate we need to be having, very legitimately so, is what can the federal government do to offset local costs in the short run and to make sure they're more evenly distributed, right? But no doubt about it that in the long run, fiscally speaking, we're way better off. Let's take 2 popular programs. Social Security and Medicare, very popular programs. The latest report from people running, these are the people running these programs, is that in less than a decade, they're gonna run out of money.
They're going to pay out more than they take in.
Exactly.
Right.
So
one way to alleviate that is to
bring in more taxpayers.
Right.
And we're not getting them through birth rates because we have now below replacement birth rates. So the only solution to get more taxpayers is to welcome immigrants.
Address something I hear frequently from those on the right, which is their first act coming to America was a crime. They entered illegally. What part of illegal do you not understand? That's a phraseology you hear. Evaluate that based on the history and the data.
Well, so this is where we could get very technical and it could become super boring because immigration law is notoriously a snooze fest. I think if you cross through a port of entry, if you come through a port of entry and you don't have the right visa or you don't have a visa at all, which is what's happening to a big percentage right now of Venezuelans and others who are coming, and the Border Patrol allows you in, gives you permission to stay while your case is adjudicated, you are not here illegally.
Right.
Right? So you are not an illegal immigrant. You're here waiting for your case to be adjudicated.
Right.
Okay, and that's about a third of all crossings right now. If you cross in between a port of entry and you come in,
right,
and nobody knows,
right,
and you don't get captured, then you are here illegally. You're here without authorization. But if you cross in between a port of entry and you get captured and you're authorized to remain while your case is adjudicated, you're not here illegally. So those are the technicalities.
Right.
But I want to emphasize again that we're too obsessed with how people come in and not what they do once they're here, because the question is, do we want to send these people back or not? And if they're bringing us benefits that are good for us, then it's a different conversation than if they're not. I think that's more than the legal technicalities. We have to start with, are we better off with these people? The answer is unambiguously yes.
Unambiguously yes.
Yes. I mean, I know that's controversial. I know some people listening to me will say, wait, but they broke the law.
Right.
And I agree. And I agree that it's not good to break the law. So I'm not advocating for illegal immigration. I'm not advocating for people that commit crimes, right? But we can't say that because they committed that crime, they're therefore more likely to commit murder or rape. No, we already know it's the opposite. The other thing is I think we have to be honest with ourselves. If the reason these people are able to stay, did you know the average undocumented immigrant has been here for over a decade?
I did know that, yes.
Okay, and a quarter of them for more than 2 decades. Most of them have jobs, pay taxes, have children. And so they're doing all the things that we would want them to do. It's unrealistic at this point to send 13 million people back, so we just have to face reality and solve that issue.
The voice of Zeke Hernandez, our special guest. Our thanks to Chef Jeffs. Stay tuned for your Takeout Outtake Especial. That's coming your way next.
I'm a huge Bon Jovi fan. I was 7 years old. I heard Slippery When Wet on the radio. Fell in love.
Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. It's where we lighten it up just a little bit. Zeke Hernandez, our special guest. His book, The Truth About Immigration, subtitle, Why Successful Societies Welcome Newcomers. Zeke, we have 3 questions we ask everyone on this show.
Okay.
Take them in whichever order you prefer. Take as much time as you need. Most influential book in your life and why? All-time favorite movie? And if you're going to thoroughly enjoy some music on a long flight or a long drive, what artist or genre is that most likely to be?
Okay. So I'll take them in reverse order. I'm a huge Bon Jovi fan. I was 7 years old. I heard Slippery When Wet on the radio. Fell in love. And, Bon Jovi actually this year, 40 years. So yeah, Bon Jovi is usually my go-to. Favorite movie? I'll kind of reveal my generation here. Forrest Gump. I go back to Forrest Gump a lot. It's just a movie that moves me, makes me laugh. Mm-hmm. I come back to that one a lot. Love that show. Most influential book. Look, I could lie here, but I'm gonna say what the one that really is. So I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
I'm religious. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Yep.
The Book of Mormon
Mm-hmm.
is the book that has changed me the most. It has helped me come closest to Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and has helped me, along with the Bible, understand my duties as a Christian and the love that God has for us the most. So I have to say, honestly, that's the one that has changed me the most.
Excellent answers all. In the last minute or so we have, do you despair in your heart about the tenor of the immigration debate currently?
Yeah, I mean, despair is a good word. But I despair in part because this is so damaging to immigrants, but actually even more so because this is so damaging to us and to our own self-interest. When you look at the evidence, it's so clear that this doesn't have to be partisan. This doesn't have to be scary. If you look at the cover of my book, it's colorful and positive because the evidence tells us that, look, there is both a conservative and a liberal case for immigration that are very aligned. And so it hurts me that we don't see that. We hurt ourselves. That's why I despair.
And other countries right now are trying to take advantage of our constricted orientation to immigration, are they not?
Absolutely.
Canada is every single day.
Canada explicitly has policies targeting immigrants saying, hey, you're having trouble with the U.S. system, come here, and they're succeeding, right? My colleague Britta Glennon and Ronnie Lee wrote a paper showing that the U.S. has poached a ton of high-tech entrepreneurs from the U.S. just because of the dysfunction of our policy, Canada. But it's also happening with international students. I'm an educator. I work at a university. Increasingly, foreign students, the world's best and brightest, are telling us they don't want to come study in America because the political uncertainty is so high that they're not sure if they're going to be able to stay, so they'd rather go to Germany, the UK, Canada, Australia. Now, I'm not one to think in zero-sum terms. I don't think we need all the world's best and brightest, but we're certainly shooting ourselves in the foot when the best and brightest are telling us that.
Zeke Hernandez, our special guest. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
We'll see you next week, folks.